has progressed to the point of major support from the European community, and that's very exciting. So I again compliment Vittorio, and in fact, ENEA has been a huge catalyst in making this happen. So I'm very, very grateful for that. What I thought to do is make a few very quick comments about two things. One being the intellectual basis that's starting to come forward. What I think has been some confusion is kind of perpetuated. So I wanted to say a few technical things, and then enter into the danger zone and say a few things about kind of community and culture that we see emerging through these international collaborations as well that I think are really valuable. So first, on the technical side, when we started the conference, I mentioned 3 classes, just to kind of roughly categorize things, of experiments. The first class was where the condensed matter physics and nuclear science is well understood, and it's a matter of very clever engineering to create new capabilities. And this is led in 1997 in Brazil, 2005 in UCLA, and more recently here at the University of Missouri with piezoelectric acceleration to tabletop fusion that's clearly verified. And typically the luminosity is fairly small, but nonetheless, again, the condensed matter effects and the nuclear effects are well understood and not surprising. So that first class of experiments, if I were an investor, I'd be very excited to invest in if I found a market because, you know, I think, again, the science and basic science is well understood. The second class, kind of liminal between it and the third, is the situation where things are pretty well understood, but there are a few surprises. And one example would be what Mark Prellis showed in terms of fractofusion. Again, people have seen this throughout the 1990s on. Certainly, Dr. Srinivasan had studied this at the Baba Atomic Research Center in 1990. Again, many other people have seen similar effects of putting deuterium into typically a metal like titanium or uranium because it does not provide that flux of deuterium. It's a very much more complex phase diagram that tends to trap the deuterium inside itself. And so then when you surge its temperature, lo and behold, these very intense flux of neutron emissions that again seems surprising compared to what's known from other experiments such as fractofusion. So again, this is a phenomenology that's itself not too surprising, but the magnitude of it really defies what we've seen before. So that's the second class where things are pretty well understood but not entirely. And then the third class being the excess heat effects, where again, the basic interactions, we have a number of theories of these things, but still quite a bit of controversy as to whether this is a Witten-Larsen-like effect, whether this is a cold fusion-like effect, etc. And that will take, I think, some time to resolve. So in that situation, I think one thing that's really been, from a physicist's perspective, 2 very fundamental confusions have existed. One is that when you start to study nuclear science, you'll be told that since the time and length scales of nuclear process are so short compared to those in the condensed matter, that you can completely ignore condensed matter physics when you consider nuclear physics, and vice versa. Well, when I was told that, as an undergraduate at MIT, I had won the opportunity to be the teaching assistant in experimental atomic physics by doing so on the course the year before. I said, hold it, we have this experiment called the Mossbauer effect that proves that the quantum state of the lattice does affect the line width of nuclear decay. And that gives us one of the best spectrometers we've ever seen on Earth. And using that spectrometer, we see huge magnetic inductions at the site of iron for cobalt-57 iron-57 decay. So I know, as a matter of fact, from the Mossbauer effect, that can't be true. Well, you know, it was like, no, the knob goes to 11 or something. You know, it's kind of like, no, we're telling you here in this dogma of how we teach that those 2 length and time scales are such that you just cannot couple nuclear with atomic. There were other examples, hyperfine interactions in spectra, where the orientation of the nuclear moment relative to the atomic moment affected, again, the spectroscopy in very subtle ways, the hyperfine interaction. Well, there are a number of other examples, too, that are being realized now more, and I think seeing this wonderful display of the difference between the solid and liquid state in indium in terms of the screening interactions is one of the most exciting scientific reports at the conference as well. So the point is that that mythology that atomic and nuclear length and timescales are so different that they can't couple, we know fundamentally is untrue. The other thing that I think has really kind of stifled the development of this, and these have been things I've discussed when we've been in Italy in the Parliament, is that the situation is that systems where you're not, where you only have very, very light interactions and where systems are not driven far from equilibrium, then we know that our, if you will, ergodic theory or statistical physics is well established. Standard normal distributions work beautifully. But in strongly interacting systems driven very, very far from equilibrium, we know that doesn't hold. And that's been manifestly made clear in a number of things, ranging from econophysics to thunderstorms in the last 10 years. And the reason why I stress that is that our intuition about what occurs in cooperative phenomena is not complete because we haven't studied strongly interacting systems driven far from equilibrium. That study is in its infancy. And incidentally, that's the sort of research that I used to do in quantum fluids and superfluids. So this is a fascinating aspect that, again, led to the surprise of deep nuclear process and thunderstorms. People were saying, how could electrons travel 30, 40 mean-free paths before colliding? How could electrons develop over an MeV of energy in the static fields and thunderstorms? Well, the reason why they could travel so far is, again, our intuition based on minimally interacting, near equilibrium statistical physics is completely inappropriate to apply to such an out-of-equilibrium situation, such a strongly interacting situation as a thunderstorm. So it's very sad to see, again, people cling to known inappropriate intellectual models and to use that as the basis to reject empirical results that are very intriguing. So it's been wonderful to see that discussion occur at a much broader level, again, with a little less scientific resolution than what I may have just said, but nonetheless, to see the Parliament of Europe listening to the importance of this and considering their long-range plan for condensed matter physics. So from the scientific perspective, I think these are things that are coming out in these international exchanges. So in just a couple minutes, I'd like to shift to the sociology and the community aspects of this that I think are very important. Both at the European Parliament in Brussels, at ENEA, where the executive leadership of ENEA is very interested in advancing this in Italy. We've had, again, these very, very good discussions. But also, Dr. Srinivasan took me to the 3 major nuclear facilities across India, and we had some excellent discussions with their leadership. And you see everywhere people realize there's something fascinating that should be pursued. But it hasn't been pursued because, well, the knob goes to 11, don't you understand? You know? It's been that there's been this dogma that we cannot pursue it. And so I think that's a very encouraging thing, that even though people are pragmatic and concerned about their reputation and their funding, people do genuinely and intellectually know honestly that there's this parameter, the linking of nuclear to atomic, hence to condensed matter scales, that has not been adequately explored. It's interesting, I don't want to go too much longer, but just to say that Thomas Jefferson is a very important figure, of course, in history, one of the real liberators of the human spirit and the human condition. Jefferson City, our capital, is 25 miles to the south. The way that tie occurred is in 1803, Thomas Jefferson funded the Lewis and Clark expedition, and they returned about 2.5 years later, very undead. They were thought to have been lost, but they weren't. And at any rate, the thing, though, is that, so Thomas Jefferson was big into exploration of the unknown. He didn't scare away from things that caused him to change his intellectual model of things. In 1819, he realized the need to systematically make that possible in the United States, and he started the University of Virginia, which he considered to be his greatest lifelong accomplishment. And that accomplishment, I think, was, I know, because when he died in 1826, he said and was working upon establishing a University of Virginia-like institution west of the Mississippi, after, again, coupling the Lewis and Clark expedition. And we are that university. We were established in 1839, slightly after Jefferson's death. But nonetheless, we were established in that spirit of open discovery. Now, if you, as I think many of us do, go to the Washington, D.C., and you get so overwhelmed by sometimes the Potomac fever you'll find there. Occasionally, I like to go and kind of recharge my batteries. I go for a walk jog. It used to be a run. Now it's a walk jog. And my favorite place is the Jefferson Memorial. And if you look at the greatest quote displayed there, that's shown in the rotunda underneath the memorial, it says, I quote, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. To inappropriately criticize another scientist's work, to defame a scientist on the basis of what they find curious, is a form of tyranny over the mind of man. So again, I think one very exciting aspect of this community is we're starting to say, well, all these pragmatic concerns, all these powerful people that say, no, don't think about this. No, follow your curiosity. It's amazing how they can advance science very appropriately. So again, I see in these international exchanges a pushback against this assumption that if you can't get it funded, it's not worth pursuing. Far from that. Sometimes the most exciting stuff is the stuff you pursue that no one would fund. I keep reminding people, and it's come up many times during this conference, never forget that powered flight as we know it today came out of the bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. So again, just a few comments and a few thoughts about the exceptional importance and again, the great praise I provide to ENEA and to the European community for this program in material science development towards understanding these low energy nuclear reactions.